The reign of the dinosaurs was during the Mesozoic Era, often called the Age of Reptiles. Divided into three periods: the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. The Mesozoic spanned 186 million years. Although dinosaurs lived during all three of these periods, they did not rule during the Triassic period. When it began 252 million years ago, dinosaurs hadn't yet evolved. By its end, dinosaurs were still not the most common megafauna, nor were they close to the size of the more famous titans of the latter two periods. This only changed at the beginning of the early Jurassic, 201 million years ago. Because of this, Triassic dinosaurs are all too often overshadowed by their later descendants. Books, video games, and other media, which include dozens of dinosaur species, rarely showcase any examples from the Triassic period beyond Coelophysis, Plateosaurus, and more recently, Herrerasauria. Even they are obscure to most of the public compared to the most famous Jurassic and Cretaceous species. Despite their treatment as a mere footnote in the rise of more iconic dinosaurs, the dinosaurs of the Triassic period were just as amazing and worthy of study. This video aims to give an overview of the first chapter of Dinosauria's history, one which is all too often skimmed over or ignored. It will give a summary of the wider Triassic world the first dinosaurs inhabited, then cover each of the major Triassic dinosaur lineages and some individual species of note. It will then examine the biogeographical trends of the early dinosaurs, and finally, cover their rise to dominance. The world the first dinosaurs lived in was very different from our own. The continents were combined into a single, massive landmass called Pangea, and global temperatures were higher than today. The climate was also much more arid, but racked by extremes. In addition to having to endure a grueling dry season, most animals also faced regular wildfires and mega monsoons created by the effect Pangea had on global wind patterns. The plants the first dinosaurs coexisted with would not have seemed alien to most people today, but the vast majority of today's plants would have been alien to the Triassic dinosaurs. Most modern plants, even grass, are flowering angiosperms, which wouldn't evolve until long after the Triassic period. The dominant plants in this flowerless world were instead conifers, cycads, and ferns. The oceans were already filled with a variety of marine reptiles, including the familiar fish-like ichthyosaurs, in addition to a number of much more obscure reptiles like the thalattosaurs. Meanwhile, freshwater habitats were haunted by a number of large temnospondyl amphibians. The Triassic was also home to their more familiar relatives, the first true frogs. Likewise, the first true lizards got their start during the Triassic, even if similar reptiles had existed long beforehand. As strange as the Triassic was, the first dinosaurs also evolved alongside the earliest members of many modern groups. As mentioned before, dinosaurs were not the primary terrestrial animals during the Triassic. The first period of the Age of Reptiles was instead filled by a more diverse assortment of animals, of which some were not even reptiles. Some of the most important creatures on land were synapsids, the proto-mammals. Synapsids were actually the dominant megafauna during the preceding Permian period, and remained so during the early Triassic. This was in spite of Synapsida losing most of its diversity following the Great Dying, a devastating mass extinction at the boundary of the Permian and Triassic. One of the most important groups of Triassic synapsids were the Dicynodonts, who were large herbivores with tusks and otherwise toothless beaks. The other major groups of Triassic synapsids were the smaller Cynodonts, who had a wider variety of diets. Among their number were the direct ancestors of mammals. There was a third clade of Triassic synapsids who were similar to the Cynodonts, the Therocephalians, but they went extinct during the Middle Triassic, which, despite the name, began after only the first 5 million years of the period and ended 10 million years later. It was during the Middle Triassic that the large synapsids were increasingly upstaged by reptiles. Most Triassic reptiles remained no larger than most of today's lizards, with these new, larger reptiles belonging to Archosauromorpha. This is a clade consisting of all reptiles more closely related to dinosaurs and crocodilians than to lizards. Much like the synapsids, many Archosauromorphs had a high or warm-blooded metabolism. Although not as high as that of modern endotherms, a high metabolism allowed these Archosauromorphs to be more active than the other ectothermic reptiles. At the beginning of the Triassic, Archosauromorphs were a collection of small, simple lizard-like creatures, along with a handful of large carnivores, but the Archosauromorphs soon expanded into a wider variety of niches. Besides dominating the apex predator niches, they also came to include herbivores like the Allocotosaurs and the Rhynchosaurs. Other Archosauromorphs invaded freshwater environments, including Vanclevia and the crocodile-like Phytosaurs. The most successful Archosauromorphs were the Archosaurs. Those Archosauromorphs descended from the last common ancestor of the dinosaurs and crocodilians. However, the most abundant Triassic Archosaurs were not dinosaurs but Pseudotsuchians, the distant relatives of crocodilians. Despite their modern representatives' reputation for being unchanging, Pseudotsuchians were incredibly diverse during the Triassic period. Among their number were the armored Adosaurs, the sail-backed Tenosauriskids, the fearsome Rauisuchids, and the small terrestrial runners who would one day evolve into the crocodilians. Many Pseudotsuchians and other Archosauromorphs greatly resembled dinosaurs. This was in part due to their close relationship with each other, but also because they filled similar niches. This was taken to an extreme by the bipedal Shuvosaurids, who paleontologists initially mistook as ornithomimosaur dinosaurs. Even before true dinosaurs came onto the scene, members of their branch of Archosauria, Ave metatarsalia, were rare until the late Triassic period. The earliest examples of these stem dinosaurs are the medium-sized predatory Aphanosaurs. The rest of the Ave metatarsalians belong to the clade Ornithodira. Besides dinosaurs, Ornithodira also includes the flying pterosaurs, who are often mistaken for dinosaurs themselves. Ornithodirans started out as tiny insect eaters, a stark contrast to the famous titans of the future. This is even more striking, since at the beginning of the Triassic, the Archosauromorph ancestors of the Archosaurs, and therefore dinosaurs, were large predators, not the more abundant pseudo-lizards. The oldest fossils of these diminutive proto-dinosaurs and proto-pterosaurs are footprints dating to the early Triassic. It should be noted the first ornithodirans were already quite bird-like, which was also true for the earliest dinosaurs. The more reptile-like appearance of many later dinosaurs was a consequence of them growing so massive. Dinosaurs and those ornithodirans more closely related to them than pterosaurs belong to the clade Dinosauromorpha. Many dinosauromorphs, such as Lagosuchus and Saltopus, looked very similar to true dinosaurs and already possessed most of the traits which set them apart from other reptiles. The reason they are not all simply considered dinosaurs is because of how Dinosauria is defined. It is the clade formed by 3 smaller clades, and all of the descendants of their last common ancestor. These are Theropoda, which includes birds, and most of the carnivorous dinosaurs. Sauropodomorpha, which contains the massive long-necked sauropods and smaller prosauropods, and Ornithischia, which includes a number of herbivorous dinosaurs like the not-quite duck-billed hadrosaurs, the horned ceratopsids, and the armored ankylosaurs. This makes the question of when the first dinosaur evolved a bit of a technicality, since the first true dinosaur was not substantially different from its dinosauromorph predecessors. For years, the oldest reliably identified and dated dinosaurs were the tiny Eoraptor and the larger Herrerasaurus. Their fossils are from the Argentinian Ischigualsto Formation, which is dated to around 231.5 million years ago during the Carnian age of the late Triassic. Similar dinosaurs, including Nandumirum and Nephavorax, have been found in the Brazilian Santa Maria Formation and have recently been dated to 233 million years ago. These early South American dinosaurs were far less diverse than those dinosaurs from the end of the Triassic, let alone the following periods. All of them superficially resembled theropods, although few, if any, truly belonged to the group. Instead, the last common ancestor of all dinosaurs, from the gigantic sauropods to the armored ankylosaurs is thought to have looked more or less like a small theropod. Still, there are enough differences between these Carnian dinosaurs to suggest the oldest dinosaur is likely at least a few million years older. One of the Ischigualsto dinosaurs, Eodromeus, is often seen as the best representative of what this first dinosaur looked like. It was a small predator, only 1.5 meters long, not much longer than its dinosauromorph ancestors or a tyrannosaurid hatchling. Like them, Eodromeus was restricted to small prey, including insects and tiny vertebrates such as the reptile Tetalura. Like most other archosaurs, Eodromeus had 5 fingers. However, 2 of them were very tiny, which was true of most other early dinosaurs. The exception to this rule were the theropods, whose definitive members only had 4 fingers during the Triassic, and often fewer in later periods. Perhaps the largest controversy relating to early dinosaur evolution is how the 3 major clades are related to each other. It was once accepted that the theropods and sauropodomorphs were more closely related to each other than to the Ornithischians, being united under the larger clade Saurischia. This consensus was challenged in 2017, and after much debate, it was concluded that there is currently insufficient evidence to determine which of the 3 dinosaurian clades split off first. For the purposes of this video, it will be assumed that the traditional Saurischia model of dinosaur evolution is basically correct. However, the Silesaurids who were once placed outside of Dinosauria will be considered Ornithischians, while Herrerasaurs, who were once thought to be theropods, will be treated as their own 4th clade. The Herrerasaurs looked basically like theropods, to the degree they were once considered early members of the group. After more recent examination of their anatomy and the anatomy of other early dinosaurs, it is not even certain if the Herrerasaurs were true dinosaurs or merely closely related dinosauromorphs. Today, Herrerasaurs are commonly classified as early diverging Saurischhians. This means that they may be closely related to theropods and sauropodomorphs, but do not belong to either group. Unlike all definitive Triassic theropods, Herrerasaurs had 5 fingers instead of 4, although both groups only had 3 non-vestigial fingers, so their basic functionality was the same. The most iconic Herrerasaurs are the Herrerasaurids, who were among the first Carnian dinosaurs. They had boxy skulls and looked almost like off-brand Jurassic Park raptors. The possibility that they were primarily scaly only increases the resemblance. The Herrerasaurids Storikosaurus and the previously mentioned Naphovorax lived in the Brazilian Santa Maria Formation and are among the oldest known dinosaurs. 2 slightly younger Herrerasaurids, San Juansaurus and Herrerasaurus itself, are found in the Ischigualsto Formation. All of the named Herrerasaurids lived in South America, but Herrerasaurid fossils have also been found in Africa and possibly Poland. For such early dinosaurs, they were remarkably deadly, possessing a stocky build and often reaching a length of 3 meters. Some adult Herrerasaurus were about the same size, but the largest known individual was between 5 to 6 meters long. While this may have been a second, larger species of Herrerasaurus, the growth rate of most Triassic dinosaurs was variable, which helped them to adapt to the all-too-frequent droughts. Either way, the largest Herrerasaurus obtained greater size than perhaps any other predatory dinosaur during the Triassic period, and was actually larger than the Jurassic Park raptors. Still, even it was outclassed by the contemporary carnivorous pseudosuchian Saurosuchus. Despite their early success, the Herrerasaurids seem to have gone extinct only a few million years after they first appeared during the Carnian Age. The possible Herrerasaurid fossils found in Poland may extend their range by over 15 million years, but at best, they seem to have been overshadowed by theropods. 3 other Herrerasaurs have been found that are not Herrerasaurids. These 3 dinosaurs, Chindosaurus, Tawa, and Daemonosaurus, may form a clade with each other, but this is currently unclear. All 3 of these Herrerasaurs lived in North America after the apparent extinction of the Herrerasaurids. The fragmentary Chindosaurus fossils suggest a length of 2 meters, while more complete Tawa specimens are 2.5 meters long. Although within the range of the Herrerasaurids, Tawa had a more elongated skull, placing it in a niche closer to that of the contemporary theropods. Still, even if it was smaller than Herrerasaurus, and lived in fear of pseudosuchian predators like Postosuchus, Tawa had risen much higher in the food chain than the first dinosaurs like Eoraptor. The most unusual Herrerasaur was Daemonosaurus. It had a short, round skull, which held the proportionally largest teeth of any other dinosaur. Of course, in life, these impressive teeth may have been obscured behind lips. Due to the lack of a modern analog, it is not clear what sort of animals Daemonosaurus evolved to prey upon. It is estimated to have been 1.5 meters long, although since it is known from little more than a skull from a potentially immature specimen, this estimate is unreliable. Daemonosaurus is notable for living during the Ratian Age, which was during the last 5 million years of the Triassic period. Before Daemonosaurus was found, it was assumed more archaic dinosaur lineages like the Herrerasaurs had already been outcompeted by their relatives. Still, the Herrerasaurs do not appear to have survived past the Triassic period, unless they did not form a true clade, but were instead the earliest theropods. Even though there is a lot of uncertainty regarding which basal dinosaurs are theropods, the Triassic period was home to numerous unambiguous theropods, all of which belong to the theoretically smaller clade Neotheropoda. Fragmentary Neotheropod fossils have been found in rocks which may have been formed during the late Carnian, but most are from the following Norian and Ratian ages. The most famous Triassic theropod is Coelophysis. Its fossils are found in the Chinle Formation in the southwestern United States. Notably, over 1,000 Coelophysis skeletons have been found at a single site at Ghost Ranch. Combined with how many of these skeletons are complete, it is one of the most heavily researched of all dinosaurs. Fortunately, unlike the exceptional Tyrannosaurus rex, Coelophysis is actually a good representative of the theropods of its time. It essentially looked like a more gracile version of Tawa. Compared to the Herrerasaurs, Coelophysis and the other early theropods were built for speed and agility over power. Atop its long neck was a thin, slender skull well suited for striking small animals. It was able to reach a length of 3 meters and a height of 1 meter. Many adult Coelophysis were much smaller than this, which, like Herrerasaurus, was likely a result of the harsh environmental conditions. The Coelophysis found at Ghost Ranch seem to have been preserved together during a single event and may have been once part of a massive flock. If so, Coelophysis would have needed to have been migratory to avoid rapidly exhausting its food supply. Models of Coelophysis' thermodynamics found it was much more vulnerable to heat stress during the day than larger contemporary pseudosuchian predators like Postosuchus. This suggests Coelophysis was nocturnal. Supporting this, a similar early Jurassic theropod, the unfortunately named Megapnosaurus, is thought to have been nocturnal due to the size of its eyes, which are inferred from its sclerotic rings. Seeing as the ancestors of the mammals were also already nocturnal, the predator-prey relationship between dinosaurs and mammals seen during the rest of the Mesozoic seems to have already been established long before the dinosaurs' reign began, at a time when the early theropods still coexisted with much larger synapsids. Many Triassic theropods, such as Notatosiraptor, were quite similar to Coelophysis in both size and lifestyle. However, other theropods continued to occupy the same niches as Eodromeus and Eoraptor. Examples of smaller Triassic theropods include Procompsognathus and Pendraig, both of whom were only 1 meter long. An important distinction between early theropods was where they lived. Although they eventually expanded to all of Pangea, Triassic theropods were less successful in the equatorial low latitudes, and like Coelophysis, seem to have been primarily nocturnal. In the cooler high latitudes, the local theropods were equally comfortable hunting at day or night, and likewise obtained a greater maximum body size. One of these larger early theropods was the 4-meter-long Zoopasaurus, who lived in Argentina. Despite its size, Zoopasaurus was far from the spot of top predator, as it coexisted with what may have been the largest terrestrial predator of the entire Triassic period, the 7-meter-long pseudosuchian Phasolosuchus. When Zoopasaurus was first found, it was thought to have had a pair of crests on its skull. This was exciting since many early Jurassic theropods, like Dilophosaurus, had similar crests, implying they were also common among their Triassic ancestors. However, later examination found that Zoopasaurus' supposed crests were actually bone which had been displaced after its death. It did have some cranial ornamentation above its eyes, but it was much more subtle. The largest Triassic theropod is generally held to be the European Liliensternus, who is estimated to have been over 5 meters long. Despite this exceptional length for an early theropod, its skull and skeleton were still more lightly built than those of the stockier Herrerasaurus, the contemporary Pseudosuchian carnivores, and equally long specimens of early Jurassic predators like Dilophosaurus, who it should be noted could grow much larger. There are a few theropods from this period that may have been larger than Liliensternus, but none of them are without controversy. Some sources cite the largest Triassic theropod as the 5.5 meter long Gojirosaurus, who is named after the movie monster Godzilla. A contemporary of Coelophysis, Gojirosaurus is notably the only large Triassic theropod from the low latitudes. Since it is only known from immature specimens, it likely grew even larger. However, Gojirosaurus may be a chimera, meaning it is a collection of bones from several different species, and its validity as a genus is in doubt. Still, at least some of the bones assigned to it do appear to be genuinely from a theropod substantially larger than Coelophysis. Another contender for the largest Triassic theropod is the bone-crushing smock, who was the apex predator of Poland at the very end of the Triassic period. While this would be quite the achievement for such an early theropod, it is unclear whether smock was a dinosaur or something else. Its skeleton is incomplete and contains a mixture of traits found in theropods, pseudosuchians, and other, more primitive archosauromorphs. Although the Triassic period may have had a few large theropod dinosaurs, the current evidence suggests that until the dawn of the Jurassic period, the iconic image most people have of the meat-eating theropods as apex predators seems to have remained a distant dream. On the other hand, many of the contemporary sauropodomorph dinosaurs were far from underdogs. Indeed, by the end of the Triassic period, they had already outgrown almost all of their local competition. Of course, even the first sauropodomorphs started out small. Like the other early dinosaurs, the oldest sauropodomorph fossils are primarily from South America, although a few have also been found in Zimbabwe. One of the most basal species was Buriolestes. Another dinosaur from the Brazilian Santa Maria Formation, Buriolestes was unsurprisingly quite theropod-like. Its brain case is the best preserved of any early dinosaur. The endocast shows that the part of Buriolestes' brain used for tracking prey with its eyes was enlarged while its sense of smell was lacking compared to the later plant-eating sauropods. Combined with its sharp, recurved, and serrated teeth, which are called zyphodont teeth, it is clear this early sauropodomorph was a carnivore. However, Buriolestes was very different from the local Herrerasaurs. It was only 1.5 meters long, about the size of a fox. Its head was also proportionally smaller than most other early dinosaurs. While this prevented it from hunting larger animals, Buriolestes could easily make rapid strikes when trying to catch small prey. Although once thought to be the first theropod, the relatively famous Eoraptor is now considered a basal sauropodomorph. Some of its teeth were zyphodont, but others resembled the leaf-shaped teeth of herbivores, which led to the idea that Eoraptor was an omnivore. However, a recent study analyzing the teeth of early dinosaurs found Eoraptor to be a pure carnivore, as was thought to be the case when it was first found. The shift to a plant-based diet can instead be seen in the more derived sauropodomorph Saturnalia, whose teeth were intermediate between those of Eoraptor and later sauropodomorphs. It also had a much longer torso than Eoraptor, which was a deceptively important evolutionary innovation. Sauropods were hindgut fermenters, relying on microbes in their massive intestines to break down the cellulose in their food. This method of digestion requires a huge gut and becomes more efficient the larger it is, which Saturnalia's larger torso helped to accomplish. Although it had already evolved many traits crucial in the evolution of herbivory, Saturnalia's neural anatomy and some of its teeth were still adapted for hunting other animals. Many other sauropodomorphs were omnivores like Saturnalia, although some, like Bagualosaurus, continued to shift towards a herbivorous diet. Despite early success in the southern hemisphere, most of these basal sauropodomorphs were extinct after the Carnian age, having been replaced by their larger and more derived prosauropod descendants. However, there was at least one late survivor named Thecodontosaurus, who was evolutionarily in between the small Carnian sauropodomorphs and the then dominant prosauropods. This 2-meter-long dinosaur lived in Britain at the very end of the Triassic period, and like the prosauropods, was a herbivore. Unlike them, Theodontosaurus's primary form of defense was the swift speed it retained from its ancestors, although it also possessed large hand claws. After the Carnian Age, the Prosauropods were the dominant sauropodomorphs for the rest of the Triassic period. The traits that set them apart were already apparent in the early prosauropod macrocolumn, who lived 225 million years ago. Their necks had become incredibly long, which allowed them to access foliage in the trees unavailable to the other contemporary herbivores. On the other hand, prosauropod heads were proportionately tiny to avoid placing too much weight on their necks. Longer necks also allowed prosauropods to forage from vast areas without moving most of their bodies. In the long term, this helped sauropods keep up with the energy demands of their massive bodies, but this would not have been possible had the small Triassic predators like Buriolestes not become small prey specialists. Although prosauropod skulls were still notably longer than those of the later sauropods, unlike Buriolestes, they could no longer be mistaken for theropods. The prosauropods had large hand claws, which may have been used to manipulate tree branches or for self-defense. This would have been important since they were not as fast as before, having become more cumbersome due to possessing even larger guts. All of this allowed these sauropodomorph dinosaurs to be incredibly effective browsers of the treetops. The basal macrocolumn was 3.5 meters long, a fairly respectable size for the time, but quaint compared to most of its successors. They were the only group of dinosaurs who matched and outright exceeded the size of their contemporaries. Some of the largest prosauropods were the lesomsaurids, who were very closely related to the true sauropods. The largest Triassic species, Ingentia, had a length of 10 meters and a staggering weight of 10 tons, greater than today's elephants. After prosauropods came onto the scene, the only Triassic animal to match the size of their largest specimens was the Polish dicynodont Lysowikia. An isolated fossil of the Carnian pseudosuchian Silosuchus suggests it could grow up to 9 to 10 meters long, although it was already extinct before the evolution of the prosauropods. Despite prosauropods often being reconstructed walking on 4 legs, like their sauropod descendants, the majority of them were not capable of pronating their forelimbs. Since this is necessary for efficient quadrupedal locomotion, most prosauropods were obligate bipeds. Some bipedal prosauropods, such as the early Jurassic Massospondylus and Mosasaurus, did walk on all 4s as hatchlings. While this gives insight into how the sauropods eventually transitioned to 4-legged locomotion, the arms of these hatchlings were still not pronated, so they would not have actually been very good at walking. Combined with their lack of teeth, these baby dinosaurs must have been reliant on their parents, much like many modern dinosaurs. Only the lesomsaurids and a few other Triassic prosauropods very closely related to the sauropods, such as Melanorosaurus, were able to properly walk on all 4s. Their forelimbs were flexed, a relic from when they were arms. Sauropods instead evolved columnar limbs, which were much better at supporting their increasingly extreme weight. While the oldest unambiguous body fossils of true sauropods are from the early Jurassic, tracks left by Triassic sauropodomorphs with columnar limbs have been found in Greenland, which may have been left by true sauropods. The most famous Triassic sauropodomorph is easily Plateosaurus, who was one of the first dinosaurs discovered. At least 3 species of Plateosaurus lived in Europe between 214 to 204 million years ago. There is very good evidence that this dinosaur lived in herds. Over 100 Plateosaurus skeletons, some of them complete, have been found together in the German Trossingen Formation. Additionally, 3 macrocolumn specimens have been found together, suggesting it may have been common for prosauropods to live in herds, much as it was for their sauropod descendants. The largest Plateosaurus individuals reached a length of 10 meters and a weight of 4 tons. But like many other early dinosaurs, many adults of the same species were much smaller. While far from defenseless, these smaller Plateosaurus were still potential prey of pseudosuchian predators and the fellow dinosaur Liliensternus. Plateosaurus is an example of just how widespread sauropodomorphs had become. While once restricted to the southern hemisphere, the prosauropods had managed to spread to the north 215 million years ago, where they thrived. However, they remained absent in the equatorial regions, at least in part due to their recently acquired bulk, making them far more vulnerable to overheating. Most evolutionary trees agree that the third major branch of Dinosauria, Ornithischia, must have evolved at the same time as the theropods, and probably even earlier. Until recently, the oldest unambiguous Ornithischian fossils were from the early Jurassic, which created an Ornithischian ghost lineage over 30 million years long. Fortunately, the mystery of the missing Triassic Ornithischians seems to have recently been solved. An increasing number of paleontologists have concluded that the Silesaurids, a clade of dinosauromorphs common during the late Triassic, were actually the first Ornithischian dinosaurs. Since the later Ornithischians are thought to have been directly descended from Silesaurids, Silesauridae is not a true clade. Its former members have instead been given the informal name Silesaurs, while all but one of the traditional Ornithischians belong to a derived clade named Prianodontia. While it will take time to see if this hypothesis becomes widely accepted, it will be assumed that the Silesaurs are basal Ornithischian dinosaurs for the purposes of this video. The Silesaurs looked similar to Aphanosaurs, but with longer legs and a more gracile build, like the early Ornithoderans. They were primarily quadrupeds, but their forelimbs were used for support rather than propelling them forward. This has been used as evidence that these primitive Ornithischians may have been able to run on only 2 legs. The later Prianodonts were ancestrally obligate bipeds. Since the same was true of most Triassic dinosaurs and closely related dinosauromorphs, such as Marasuchus, it has generally been held the first dinosaur was also a biped. The primarily 4-legged stance of the Silesaurs may argue against this, although this may have been a derived feature that was reversed by their Jurassic descendants. Since they were early members of the clade, Silesaurs lack most of the features originally used to define Ornithischia. Ornithischia means bird-hipped, in reference to how their pubis points backwards like in birds. Beyond this, Ornithischian hips have little resemblance to bird hips, and a backward-pointing pubis evolved independently in other dinosaur lineages, including the actual ancestors of birds. Silesaur pubises instead point forwards, which is the ancestral condition among reptiles. Another important feature not present in the first Ornithischians is the predentary bone. This bone supported the beak on their lower jaws and is unique to the clade. However, the end of the lower jaw of most Silesaurs resembles a predentary bone. It likely filled a similar function and was its evolutionary predecessor. Much like with the sauropodomorph dinosaurs, there was a shift from carnivory to herbivory among the Triassic Ornithischians. Basal Silesaurs, like Luisuchus, were very small predators with zyphodont teeth. Later Silesaurs, like Silesaurus itself, were a bit larger and ate both plants and insects. The derived Silesaur Quanosaurus was the most dedicated plant eater among the Silesaurs. Its teeth were diamond-shaped with coarse denticules, the typical shape of the Prianodont Ornithischians of the early Jurassic. One of the most derived Triassic Ornithischians was Pasanosaurus. Before the hypothesis that Silesaurs are basal Ornithischians gained much acceptance, it was repeatedly reassigned between each group, a testament to them being one and the same. Although Pasanosaurus is not well enough preserved to determine whether it more closely resembled Silesaurs or the early Jurassic Ornithischians, it was evolutionarily between the two. Since Pasanosaurus lived around the middle of the Triassic, and the first Prianodont fossils are from the very beginning of the early Jurassic, it is probable the more derived Ornithischians evolved before the end of the Triassic period. Indeed, the Prianodont Eocursor may have actually lived during the end of the Triassic period, although the exact age of the rocks it was found in is currently debated. Therefore, it and the early Jurassic Ornithischians will be covered here as proxies for their slightly older Triassic ancestors. They were primarily herbivores, although a recent study of the Prianodont Lesothosaurus found it, and perhaps some other early Ornithischians, may have been omnivores, eating insects and other fauna when the opportunity presented itself. In this regard, they had not changed that much from their Silesaur ancestors. Unlike Silesaurs, Prianodont femurs were shorter than their tibias, which is typical of animals built for speed. There is evidence that at least some of these dinosaurs lived in herds, since numerous skeletons of Lesothosaurus have been found together in a single bone bed. A notable clade of early Jurassic Ornithischians are the Herrerasauria. These dinosaurs had distinctive, fang-like tusks at the front of their mouths, which are thought to have been used in fights against each other over mates and territory. These large, sharp teeth were once believed to have been holdovers from their carnivorous ancestors, but due to their absence in Silosaurs and other basal Ornithischians, this is no longer considered likely. The most primitive early Jurassic Ornithischian was Lachintosaura, who is just outside of Priodontia, but also not a Silosaur. Since a complete Lachintosaura skeleton hasn't yet been found, it is currently unknown whether or not it had a predentary bone, although its longer legs suggest a bipedal gait like its contemporaries. To summarize the various types of Triassic dinosaurs, the first species were small carnivores. Most theropods and Herrerasaurs remained small to medium-sized predators. A few grew larger, but even they seem to have remained consistently overshadowed by larger archosaurs. The sauropodomorph dinosaurs shifted from a carnivorous diet to a herbivorous one, and afterwards grew to become the only truly massive Triassic dinosaurs. The smaller Ornithischian dinosaurs also became plant eaters. Most Triassic Ornithischians were four-legged Silosaurs, although the bipedal Prianodonts had likely already evolved before the Jurassic. Dinosaurs were geographically limited to the southern hemisphere 233 million years ago. Since early dinosaur fossils are most common in South America, it is suspected that they first evolved there. By 215 million years ago, dinosaurs had not only become more abundant, but had also spread throughout the entire world. They were smaller and less common at low latitudes, but Triassic dinosaur fossils and footprints become more common the closer the region once was to the North and South poles. Notably, the environment preserved in the Ishigwalsto Formation, the home of many of the first dinosaurs, was very cold. The upper estimates for the temperature only come to 11 degrees Celsius, or about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. While few Triassic body fossils have been found in the poles themselves, their footprints indicate they were most abundant there. One of these Triassic polar sites is the Zhongar Basin in northwestern China, which was within the Arctic Circle 200 million years ago. Notably, debris that had been characteristically moved by ice was found among the sediment there, indicating the prehistoric lake there periodically froze. Since global temperatures were higher during the Triassic, even the poles were not tundra, but cool, humid, temperate forests. Even so, this is remarkably different from the common image of dinosaurs, who are often envisioned living in tropical environments. Although it has been known for some time that they also inhabited the colder Arctic and Antarctic, polar dinosaurs were treated as exceptional. Now, it appears dinosaurs started out as cold climate specialists and then moved to the tropics. The dinosaurs were able to survive in such places in part due to their high metabolism. Producing their own body heat allowed them to keep warm in spite of the external environment. Some other archosauromorphs, including the Pseudosuchians, also had high metabolisms and could be found in high latitudes. However, they were reliant on the ability to hibernate during the winter. Dinosaurs were able to be active throughout the year due to their secret weapon: feathers. While it has been known that many theropods had feathers since 1996, primitive feathers have also been found in Ornithischians such as Tianyulong, and even the closest relatives of the dinosaurs to survive to the Jurassic period, the pterosaurs. All of this suggests the very first dinosaurs had simple feathers. It is thought these primitive feathers originally evolved to provide thermal insulation. The heat produced by the body of an endothermic or mesothermic animal like a dinosaur is eventually lost to the environment. This process becomes quicker the smaller the animal and the colder the external environment. A covering of proto-feathers would have meant the Triassic dinosaurs could maintain a high body temperature even when it was freezing. Although no Triassic dinosaur fossil is in good enough condition to determine what its outer covering was like, a recent study which modeled the thermodynamics of early dinosaurs found that most of them would have not been able to even survive without the thermal insulation feathers provided. This even extends to Coelophysis, despite its native environment being much warmer than its higher latitude cousins. Even though the first dinosaurs likely had feathers, large fluffy coats were not retained in all of their descendants. This is best demonstrated by the extensive scale impressions found on many late Cretaceous hadrosaurs. The massive Triassic Prosauropods were already so large that they likely lost their feathery coats to avoid overheating, much like how many of today's similarly sized mammals have lost most of their fur. Although thermal insulation can remain useful or even outright necessary for large animals in sufficiently cold environments, the polar Triassic forests were still a far cry from the frigid landscapes that later produced the likes of the woolly mammoth. Even without insulation, larger prosauropods would have struggled in the tropics, likely explaining their absence there. Whether or not the Herrerasaurs or the largest Triassic Theropods had feathers remains unexplored. However, the largest known feathered dinosaur, the Tyrannosauroid Eutyrannus, was larger than even the most massive theropods from not just the Triassic period, but from the early Jurassic as well. Its native environment in early Cretaceous China experienced cold winters, not unlike those endured by many of its Triassic predecessors at high latitudes, suggesting they needed feathery coats as well. The role of the dinosaurs during the Triassic was very different from those of the Jurassic and Cretaceous, but understanding them also requires understanding what changed to allow the Age of Dinosaurs to happen. It was once thought the dinosaurs gradually replaced most of their competition, who were perceived as comparatively primitive. It is true many of the more basal Archosauromorphs, particularly those with lower metabolisms, did become extinct as the Triassic period progressed and were replaced by archosaurs. However, most of the replacements were pseudosuchians, not dinosaurs. Instead, the rise of the dinosaurs was much more opportunistic. Rather than driving the incumbents of a niche to extinction, they merely took over when the previous holder was wiped out by something else. This was actually something of an archosauromorph tradition. They only became so successful in the first place due to the synapsids being devastated by the Permian mass extinction and the resulting fragility of the unpredictable early Triassic ecosystems. The dinosaurs' first big break was during the Carnian Age, when volcanic activity increased for a period of about 2 million years. Among the effects on the global environment was a spike in global humidity, called the Carnian pluvial event. The changing climate led to the extinction of numerous species. This may have been responsible for the downfall of the Herrerasaurids and Basal Sauropodomorphs, but many of the other vacant niches were filled by dinosaurs. They then slowly became more common for the rest of the Triassic period, but remained underdogs to their pseudosuchian cousins. This changed 201.3 million years ago, when another period of volcanic activity began in the equator, only this time far more extreme. Various toxic gases were released into the atmosphere, and the concentration of atmospheric CO2 soon doubled or even tripled, leading to rapid global warming. The release of another gas, sulfur dioxide, acidified the oceans, decreasing their pH well below what most marine organisms could endure. When this volcanic activity finally ended 600,000 years later, 76% of all species have been driven to extinction. Almost all of the pseudosuchians perished during the end Triassic mass extinction, with the only survivors being small crocodilomorphs like Sphenosuchus. Likewise, besides the flying pterosaurs, almost all of the other non-dinosaurian archosauromorphs were wiped out, along with the dicynodonts and most of the large amphibians. In contrast, an unusual number of dinosaurs survived the mass extinction, including some of their largest representatives. That is not to say they came out completely unscathed. Herrerasaurs and Dinosaur Ornithischians were rendered entirely extinct. Still, the early Jurassic dinosaurs were not simply the descendants of a handful of species that got lucky. Multiple branches of Theropoda and Sauropodomorpha managed to survive a mass extinction that wiped out all other terrestrial animals of remotely comparable size. Part of the reason for the seemingly miraculous survival of so many large dinosaurs was their location. The eruptions that caused the mass extinction were at the equator, while most dinosaurs were concentrated closer to the poles. Of course, dinosaurs were not the only large animals there, but they did have another advantage, one which made them largely immune to another, and until recently underappreciated killer behind the end Triassic mass extinction. The ash and debris from the largest volcanic eruptions remained in the atmosphere for some time, blocking so much sunlight that even with more CO2 reflecting it back to Earth, temperatures fell drastically. These volcanic winters could have easily lasted 10 years. At the tropical equator, temperatures may have dropped to below freezing levels, something most of the local fauna would have been completely unprepared for. In contrast, the dinosaurs' feathers meant they were uniquely predisposed towards surviving these suddenly colder conditions. Furthermore, with their malleable growth rates, younger dinosaurs would have been able to stop growing during the resulting famine. The largest species of Triassic dinosaurs may have survived due to their ability to stay small. To summarize, The dinosaurs ruled the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods not because they were superior to other reptiles, but because their ancestors happened to be better suited to survive a random and geologically brief disaster at the end of the Triassic period. This mirrors how one group of synapsids would later replace the dinosaurs. Indeed, the early mammals and the remaining crocodilomorphs would have otherwise been in a great position to take over the new Jurassic World if not for the fact that the dinosaurs were already significantly larger and therefore able to fill most of the empty niches before the rest of the survivors had a chance to make much progress. Mammals and a few other cynodonts would remain in the shadows until the Cenozoic era. Although they were highly diverse, the largest Mesozoic mammals were only as large as a badger, and most were far smaller. The remaining pseudosuchians had far better luck reclaiming the niches of their ancestors. Some of them took advantage of the extinction of the semi-aquatic phytosaurs, giving rise to the crocodilians, including a number of massive dinosaur killers. Many crocodilomorphs remained on land, and some of these eventually also managed to compete with the now dominant dinosaurs. The largest of these land crocs, Razanandrogobe, was already a sizable dinosaur killer as early as the Middle Jurassic, echoing its extinct Triassic kin. Others, like the herbivorous Simosuchus, followed new evolutionary paths. Likewise, the fellow Archosaurian pterosaurs grew in diversity. While they largely remained small during the Jurassic period, Cretaceous pterosaurs became some of the only other large terrestrial animals besides dinosaurs. Some became the largest creatures to ever fly, and in some cases were terrors on land as well. Still, although there were some exceptions, nearly all large terrestrial animals were dinosaurs for the next 135 million years. The Age of Dinosaurs had truly begun. Sauropodomorph dinosaurs quickly expanded into the tropics. Sauropods were the most successful there, and were the largest dinosaurs of the early Jurassic, although they were not yet substantially larger than the largest Triassic sauropodomorphs. However, the cooler regions remained dominated by prosauropods, very similar to those from the Triassic. It didn't take long for theropods like Coelophysaurus to grow large enough to hunt the largest of their distant kin, replacing the pseudosuchians who had terrorized their own ancestors. Other early Jurassic theropods, such as Tacharaptor, held essentially the same niches as before. Some of them were once even classified as species of Coelophysis. The only thing that really changed for the smaller dinosaurs is that their predators now happen to be fellow dinosaurs rather than pseudosuchians. All of the surviving Ornithischian dinosaurs were the Prionodonts, with the exception of the closely related Lachintosaura. While the iconic hadrosaurs and horned ceratopsids wouldn't evolve until the Cretaceous period, the Ornithischian clade Thyreophora had already developed bony armor. Soon, the Thyreophoran Scyletosaurus became quadrupedal to better support its greater size, replacing the now extinct pseudosuchian Atosaurs. Still, the smaller bipedal Ornithischians stuck around to the very end of the Mesozoic era, living much as their primeval ancestors had. However, this was an exception. Although the early Jurassic dinosaurs were similar to those of the Triassic, except for those who had replaced their extinct competition, by the Middle Jurassic they had come to exceed them. The sauropods grew more massive than anything before or since, while the prosauropods declined and finally became extinct. Likewise, a single clade of theropods, Avarostra, had replaced all others by the late Jurassic. They seem to have been descended from large Dilophosaurus-like predators, but soon went on to include small carnivores, as well as omnivores, herbivores, and of course, birds. From the late Jurassic onwards, few dinosaurs could be mistaken for their Triassic ancestors. Of course, even though giant dinosaurs are the most iconic, the majority of the Jurassic and Cretaceous dinosaurs remained small. With almost no competition, these small dinosaurs were actually more abundant and diverse than the dinosaurs of the Triassic. But if it were not for those early dinosaurs, the great radiation of Dinosauria would have never happened, and the current multitude of birds would not exist. The Triassic dinosaurs placed the evolution of Dinosauria into context. For all their fame, they started out as just one of many clades of reptiles, at a time when not all of their competition even were reptiles. But within 30 million years, they went from a geographically isolated group of tiny carnivores to a diverse array of species, which served as the foundation of nearly all the later megafauna for well over 100 million years. Before then, they thrived in climates most other reptiles shunned, and almost single-handedly invented an entirely new class of large herbivore. Although they were fewer in number than later dinosaurs, those dinosaurs which did exist during the Triassic period were equally remarkable animals.
Thank you for watching, and a thank you to themattalorian for narrating this video. Also, a thank you to Bethany Lester for creating this illustration depicting Triassic dinosaurs in a snowy environment in the high latitudes. Without her, there would not have been any visual depictions of Triassic dinosaurs in such surroundings. This is particularly important since such temperate, seasonally chilly environments were where they thrived during the Triassic period. I hope this video has achieved its aim to give an effective overview of the Triassic dinosaurs and sparked interest in learning even more. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit the like button, and subscribe if you would like to see more. Finally, be sure to have a great day.